So right now, I am eagerly anticipating the release of Another Code R, the remakes of Trace Memory and its sequel on the Wii that never came out on in North America. I played the demo for about an hour. I finished it, and I was really, really anxious to keep playing. I was just like completely invested in the story and the setting and the game. Like it was just a fantastic experience. The game more than exceeded my expectations. I was shocked with how well written it was, how compelling it was, how interesting it was. Like lately, it feels like a lot of story-driven games, even on Nintendo consoles, haven't been all that great. It's been something I've been talking about for a long time. How story-driven games have just completely fallen off and become completely ridiculous. But there was a time when that was not true. In the DS era, we were getting a ton of unique, interesting games that were story driven, but still managed to deliver really cool, unique experiences, right? You had Trauma Center, you had Ace Attorney, and you had the stuff from Sing. You had stuff like Hotel Dusk, which I have played already, and you have this, which offer interesting characters, interesting design decisions, and are really distinct, unique game experiences, right? Like, it is really surprising seeing how enthusiastic people are about this collection because when Famicom Detective Club came out, we all thought that like, oh yeah, it's that girl from Melee, right? She had a trophy. Like with this, it's like there's actual real enthusiasm for this IP. Like not a ton of people have played Trace Memory, but those of us who have are really, really enthusiastic about it, right? And that got me thinking about, the DS era of story-driven games. Like, is it the peak of video game storytelling? Because when you look at games like, JRPGs, which I think are typically seen as like the pinnacle of video game writing and interactivity and stuff like that, when you look at those titles, right, they're very long, they're padded, it takes like a long time for anything to happen, right? Like you have to spend a long time to get invested. While something like Trace Memory, something like Hotel Dusk, they really excel at being well paced, right? There's always something happening all the time, right? Not having a ton of gameplay sections, not having combat, not having like a lot of things, like they really make the games feel more grounded. They feel more organic. They feel more natural. They feel like an actual story, right? That could happen in real life as opposed to being a video game, right? Like it's kind of shocking how when I play Trace Memory, how it goes to great lengths, kind of establishing the characters, establishing the setting, establishing like the core concept of being this girl, the daughter of neurosurgeons who goes to this abandoned island and finds this ghost who doesn't have its memory, right? Like you find this guy, this ghost, and like he doesn't have a memory, and you think back to how your protagonist's parents were like studying memory, right? And then like you kind of get this really cool like sense of like, wow, how is all of this going to tie together? Like it is legit a really interesting setup. And one that you would never get out of something like The Last of Us Part 2, right? Like Trace Memory does so much more, making the protagonists feel like actual people with actual conflicts, with actual concerns, with actual problems, right? Like it does so much to have an actual story compared to these derivative, uninspired, boring movie games, right? And I really don't think it is alone in that. I think the DS era is filled with games that have a sense of progression and a similar concept and similar character writing. Like I talk a lot about how the Ace Attorney trilogy, particularly the third one, has a ton of heart, a ton of personality, a ton of really interesting, memorable storylines, and I don't think a lot of people give enough of credit for it, right? Like, I don't think until you finish like all three of them that you kind of realize that, like, wow, this was a really interesting, unique experience that I'm never really going to have again, right? A lot of people get hung up on the goofiness of it or the silliness of it or, oh, that could never happen in real life without really taking into account that, like, this is a video game with its own like unique own unique take on what story it wants to tell, what it wants to deliver, what it wants to do, and it does so beautifully, right? You can laugh about updated autopsy of reports and Godot acting the way he does all you want. Right? You could talk about like, oh, Franziska von Karma wouldn't be allowed to whip anybody in the courtroom. Bro, that's the joke. Like have some fun. Like come on. All right, like you don't respect what the creators were trying to do. Essentially. I think anybody who thinks about this critically, who like really compares the plot to Trace Ace Attorney compared to these movie games, to Uncharted, to BioShock, to like whatever, right? They would come away with the opinion that like, wow, these smaller budget niche Japanese games on the DS are better than these major big budget AAA games. It is very obvious to anybody who actually tries these DS games just how much better they are than the competition in this regard if you actually play them, right? And it's kind of shocking to me, like the lengths that people will go to kind of justify things like Baldur's Gate 3 or Elden Ring or what have you, instead of acknowledging that like, there are better stories and games out there, right? On Nintendo DS, on Nintendo platforms in general. Like, why have we gone so long, especially during that period in the PS3 era when this stuff was super popular? Like LA Noir or whatever, like Red Dead Redemption 2, Red Dead Redemption 1 in general, where people seriously pretended as if these major AAA games had amazing stories, when in reality the games that were stopping them, that were really going out of their way to have interesting, engaging plots, characters, concepts, gorgeous artwork, great game, memorable gameplay. Like they were all on Nintendo platforms. They were all on the Nintendo DS. Why exactly did the gaming industry not acknowledge that the Nintendo DS had better story-driven games than the competition? Why exactly are we in this position where we have to pretend that other companies can compete, right? Trace Memory is a relatively niche IP, and yet in this specific regard, I think there's really nothing else this year that's going to beat it out. And I really don't think it's the only game like it on Nintendo platforms.